Next up is House File 4205, Representative Tabke. And this bill also has an author's amendment. And Representative Tabke, do you want us to, maybe just tell us about the, I don't know, which way do you prefer to do it? Do you want to tell us about the bill and then tell us what the amendment does, or should we just adopt it?
I would just adopt it, Madam Chair.
Okay, so it's sort of a technical amendment, more or less?
It is not a technical amendment. It definitely has some substance to it, but it gets the bill in the shape that I would like it to be in.
Okay, all right. Well, if I haven't already, I will move that House File 4205 be re-referred to the Public Safety Finance and Policy Committee. So this is going back to public safety. And I will move the A1 amendment to put the bill in the order in which the author would like to discuss it. Is there any discussion to the A1 amendment? All right, seeing none, all in favor of approval of the A1 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion prevails. The A1 is adopted. So we have the bill as amended before us. Representative Tabke, please go ahead and speak to the bill as amended.
Thank you very much, Chairs Liebling and Scott. I really appreciate you hearing this bill today. This is a really important topic that we, as Minnesotans, need to make sure that we are addressing and, excuse me, and working through here in the state. So as license plates are out in the public and as everyone is using, driving, getting from point A to point B, they have an expectation that the state of Minnesota is protecting their private data. So just as a level setting, with your license plate, you have the license plate number, whether you paid your tabs, and what vehicle that is associated with are public-facing data. So anybody can have access to that data, but the owner of that vehicle, their address, their phone number, their personal information, those kinds of things are private data. And through Operation Metro Surge, what we found out was that our data is actually wide open, that many, many folks are able to access our data. And so this is a data privacy bill. And so what we found out through many things is that there are, I'll just give a good example of what's happening, is that folks from all across the country are accessing Minnesotans' data. And so we want to make sure that that is locked down, and so that Minnesotans can trust that their private data is kept private and in the state of Minnesota. And so we have this bill today. Big reason why this is important is that we have when police departments are handling this data correctly and using it for investigatory purposes, what is happening is one police department, and this is from ACLU data requests, one police department in the Metro had, over the first 6 weeks of 2026, had 180 times where people's data was accessed via license plates. Another similar sized city in the Metro had 425,000 times where license plate data was accessed. And so this is, to me, this is an unconscionable, needs to be dealt with, must be handled type issue where our private data is being accessed by many, many folks. And so what this bill will do is it makes anybody outside the state of Minnesota have to have a warrant in order to access our Minnesotans' private data. And so what we have found is happening is that anybody has access generally to our data, and there is no one that is being held accountable, transparency, giving a thumbs up or thumbs down, whether people should be accessing and are following our laws here in Minnesota. And so what this would do is make sure that you have to have a warrant before you access that data. Secondly, what that will do is make sure that on the private side of things, so when a business is using a license plate reader, that data that they get to make sure that folks that have been trespassed or that organized retail theft, which we know is a thing that we've been working on here in Minnesota, that folks who are associated with that stores know when those people are there, but also when I go to a store should not be public data and available to everybody. And so this would wall that off so that that data cannot be disseminated or transferred to anyone else. And so this is what I think is a really good bill to make sure that we are able to continue with law enforcement, to make sure that law enforcement is able to access license plate data as necessary to solve crimes and for investigatory purposes, but also that we are protecting Minnesotans' private data. And with that, I have a testifier who, I don't know, would you like to testify or just answer questions? Okay. We have Mr. Beeler from the ACLU.
Okay. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning, Chairs Liebling, Chair Scott, members of the committee. My name is John Beeler. I'm the Policy Counsel with the ACLU of Minnesota. We're testifying today in support of HF 4205 as amended. The function of these license plate readers far exceeds what was contemplated when the statute was written in 2015. What we've observed in the last decade is an explosion in the use of these systems, the use of and involvement of private companies, and the technological capacity to run a number of searches that would have been unfathomable to the 2015 legislature. The way the statute was designed envisioned that when one law enforcement agency, in-state or out, made a request for local law enforcement data, that the agency receiving request would ensure compliance with our Data Practices Act, that it was related to an act of criminal investigation, and that the requesting agency understood Minnesota data practices law and would adhere to them with the requested data. That is both general practice within the Data Practices Act and its practice within this statute, that those protections follow the data. That's already in law. Now, the introduction of third-party companies has, at best, obscured these obligations. The data collected by our local law enforcement ALPRs is stored in servers managed by these companies, and then without any back-end system management that's shared with any law enforcement agency that also contracts with those companies. The companies also grant themselves relatively broad license and contractual exemptions in how they utilize that data to train their systems and develop their software. So what this has led to is quite a wide disparity in how our local law enforcement uses these systems. Representative Tapke noted that we sent out various data requests to local law enforcement agencies. One agency had 180 searches run against their systems in the last 30 days. Another agency had 425,000 searches run against their systems in a roughly 45-day period. So when I reached out to the police department A, and I spoke with them, and they said, we like our system. 180 searches, that seems like a lot. And I said, in the grand scheme of things, you're doing quite well. And they walked me through what they do well. And so they have data sharing agreements with every agency that has it. They know exactly what agencies have access to their system, and they can go in through these third-party companies and they can manage who can search those systems. And so that is in-state and it's out-of-state law enforcement agencies, but they know who's accessing them. And that's done a really good job of restricting who has access to those license plate readers. What they do then too is they turn around and they publicize. They publish through a transparency portal, every agency that can access their department, how many searches were run, what sort of hot lists they use. They use the BCA, and then I think they use a nationwide child locator, lost child locator. So what this bill does today modernizes the ALPR statute to ensure it's reflective of how these public-private ALPR agreements work, ensure there's public disclosure of who our agencies are sharing data with, and ensuring that we have finally some public reporting of the private use of these ALPR data, these ALPR systems. And so that's disclosure of where they are and reporting on how many are in use, telling the public where they're being used, and then also ensuring that those private companies understand that they have data obligations as well. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, thank you. So we have another person who signed up to testify, Jeff Potts. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and go ahead with your testimony.
Sure. Thanks, Madam Chair. My name is Jeff Potts. I am the Executive Director for the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association. I'm here to testify on the roughly 300 police chiefs, hundreds of command staff members across the state. And I just want to share just a little bit of information about, the current situation with regard to ALPR. There has been, more use as this technology has become somewhat easier to acquire. And so we have several agencies throughout the state that are currently complying with the state law and using ALPR. I could go on and on about the successes with regard to the use of LPR. I'll use one just for the sake of brevity here today. January 21st of this year, a 7-year-old girl was abducted. She vanished from her bus stop in Zimmerman, Minnesota. Family, of course, is obviously distraught. Law enforcement gets involved in that child, fortunately, was located 138 miles south near the Iowa border. LPR was used in that case to determine who committed that crime. That's probably one of the best examples, success stories of ALPR. Fortunately, the child was found. However, the suspect was charged with kidnapping and criminal sexual conduct in that case. LPR was a critical component in that investigation. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of other examples. Our concern with this bill, as it's written here today, is requiring audits to be done annually. Those cost about $2,500. We have seen some small agencies acquire this technology. While it may be a little bit cheaper than it was a few years ago, the $2,500 a year audit will make that impossible for them to continue. That is a large expense, particularly for a small agency. Additionally, the provisions on lines 2.10 through 2.14, I think there's some additional information. One of the vendors I've spoken with at great length is Flock. A lot of agencies use Flock, they use Axon, they use other vendors. I'm told that with regard to national data sharing, which seems to be a concern that's been brought forward here today, that as of May of 2025, Flock actually changed their system and no longer offers national data sharing. So there's no agencies in Minnesota currently that currently use national data sharing. However, they can enter into what has already been described as memorandums of understanding to do some data sharing as it relates to their LPR data. And so our position is we oppose this bill, certainly open to additional conversations about appropriate guardrails for LPR. However, the cost that this bill carries for small agencies is likely going to eliminate that technology in those agencies. As I talked about the case in January, the small agencies were involved in that abduction case. And again, I could rattle on about other positive or success stories with LPR. I think there may be other ways to accomplish what the author wants to accomplish. I think the vendors are keenly aware of concerns, privacy concerns, as Flock has already done by turning off the national lookup feature for agencies across the state. We're open to more conversation on this, but as it's written here today, we oppose the bill. Thank you, Madam Chair and members, for allowing us to testify here today.
Thank you, Mr. Potts. And just a question, you were just referred to lines 2.10 to 2.14 of the bill, and that's current language from my understanding of here. So
Of the amendment, Madam Chair.
it's in the amendment?
2.10 to 2.14 of the amendment.
Of the amendment.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right. Is there any, well, did you want to say anything further, Representative Tapke, and then we'll open it up to member questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Liebling. I just want to make sure that as everyone that I've talked with about this bill is that this is critical data that needs to be protected in Minnesota. And if there are things, as Chief Potts discussed with the audits, and that's a problem, very happy to change that. The reason why that's changed in the amendment is to make sure that we know how this is working and know what's happening so that we have more accurate current data on this. So I would like to at least to keep the first year in, but then biennial after that, I am very fine with as that is an expense for folks. And so happy to make changes and continue to work on this bill if it is allowed to go forward into public safety. We can make some changes. I know there's a lot of overlap between the two committees and make sure that we get that done.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go to member questions and discussion. Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Tapke, for bringing the bill. Appreciate you reaching out, trying to connect before the hearing today. Unfortunately, that didn't work out for us, but we can have the conversation here. So I appreciate what it is that you're trying to do, and it feels like legislator to legislator, it feels like this is a common thing we've seen this session because we have this truncated timeline, deadlines are coming up, so you kind of just have to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what'll stick. In this case, I think you're asking the right questions, right? Technology is developing so rapidly that it's really increasingly taxing the capacity of government to keep up, because government's meant to be deliberative and slow and reactive. But in this case, it just feels like the scope of the bill that you have before us today would potentially unintentionally truncate investigations like the one that we heard about from Mr. Potts. And so I'm going to be a no on this today. I think we should continue to have the conversation, because I think the real issue is not, who has the data, but how it's accessed and on what terms and to what effect, just making sure that that's all tied in with the constitutional protections that I think you're aiming after. So I'll ask for a roll call, Madam Chair, and appreciate your work on this.
All right, a roll call's been requested. There will be a roll call. Representative Duran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Tabke, for bringing this forward. There's some information that you expressed about personal data when it comes to license plate readers and grabbing their information. Can you tell me the difference between if a police officer actually enters in your license plate in their computer or a license plate reader? Can you tell me the data that's actually received from both of those and tell me the difference in it, please?
Representative Tapke.
Yeah, Chair Liebling and Representative Duran. So there is, I guess I'll ask a clarifying question on your question here. Are you asking what type of data is received based on the different inputs on those kinds of things? Or are you asking about what comes back in general?
Representative Duran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, because we're worried about the public data and private data, right, that's being received from these LPRs, right? Can you tell me what data is actually received when the LPR is used? What type of data is actually given to the peace officer? And can you tell me the difference between what the actual information you're going to get from an actual police officer typing in your license plate to the computer or the LPR? Can you tell me the difference and the information that's received from both of those?
Representative Tapke.
Yeah, Chair Liebling, thank you for that question. So there is, when you type it in, or whether it's from an ALPR, it depends on what the query is on that. And so it is that same data comes back. It is the very similar way of accessing those data. So to me, what this bill is about is the protecting private data. Not necessarily, what this will do is help to reduce the mechanism that allows hundreds of thousands of these queries to happen on a day-to-day basis. But what this will do is Minnesotans have an expectation that their private data is private. And so we have a system that is wide open to a lot of folks, which is a very, very, what I think is a way too wide net being cast on things. And this bill, as Chief Potts, the example that Chief Potts used, our bill would not have stopped or changed anything that was happening in that instance. So it is something that would still continue to allow law enforcement to do their job, which I want to have happen. But I also don't want just a wide open system where anybody's private data can be accessed without anyone having oversight, accountability, or transparency onto how this happens.
Representative Duran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is that data? What is received when you query the license plate? What information is actually given to the peace officer? Okay, what is that? And what is it private? And what is that data? Because you're saying it's the same data and you didn't answer my question. So if a police officer actually types in the license plate, okay, what information do I receive? And the LPR, when that information reads the license plate, what information does the peace officer get? What data is that? Okay, can you give me some specific data points that is given? What do I receive? What does the officer look at when they get that information?
Representative Tapke.
Thank you, Chair Liebling and Representative Duran. So as you well know, it depends on what the request of that data is. So if it's just looking at a license plate number, then it's the request gives you public facing data on that. So it's a license plate where the tabs are paid and what vehicle that license plate is attached to. But if you ask different queries, so what has been happening has been for very benign wide-ranging investigatory request on things, then you get name, you get address, you get additional private information without any oversight and without anybody asking if that data was necessary for things.
Okay, do you have more, Representative Duran? Because I have 1, 2, 3 more people on the list. Okay, go ahead. Representative Duran.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you're confusing what is actually received for the information that's actually obtained from these requests. I don't understand why we automatically assume that all this information, all this private information about individuals are given to the peace officers or third-party individuals without actually going into a separate system and looking at this. The thing is, when you run that LPR, or when you run that license plate check, it's only limited information that you receive. You're going to have to verify that somewhere else. So what's going on right now is that I think you're confusing and conflating a lot of the issues that are going on here with not really the information that's received from these checks. So I guess I'm willing to work with you on this and work with this, but the registration is what you're going to get. Okay, that little data. Okay,
I feel like that's what I said,
yeah.
Representative.
But you're also saying you're getting a lot more information about that, which is not right. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Representative Moeller.
Madam Chair, and I do have a question for Chief Potts, if he can make his way up there. And thank you so much, Chair Tabke, for bringing this bill. I think it's really important. And I just want to be clear in understanding the Chief's opposition is based on the $2,500 a year annual audit. And I thought I heard you say because of that $2,500 audit, law enforcement agencies won't be able to use this technology because that $2,500 would be cost prohibitive. Could you please clarify if that's what your opposition is?
Mr. Potts.
Madam Chair and Representative Moeller, to clarify, my position is that the bill would require audits to be done annually instead of biannually. 75% of our members are smaller than 20 officers. 50% are smaller than 10. If they are able to currently have LPR and can afford the cost of the technology, the ongoing expense of keeping it, it's challenging. I don't think they'll all be able to continue that if they're now required to do a $2,500 audit every year. So I am concerned about small agencies' ability to maintain the technology based on the annual audit requirement instead of biannual audit requirement.
Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do have some follow-up questions, but in the interest of time, I won't ask those now. I do know that many local agencies do request funding from their city councils to be able to use the technology in the first place. And it's just hard for me to understand why the $2,500 annual audit would be cost prohibitive when you talked about how great this technology is in helping find things like a kidnapped child. So with that, I'll leave it and we can talk offline.
All right, thank you, Representative Moeller. Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Representative Tabke, for bringing this important legislation. I had a few points I wanted to make that I'll do quickly. First of all, we should not trust Flock. They are not a trustworthy company. If you've looked at the contracts that they enter into, they are hugely expansive, and we have very little control over what they're going to do with our data. And so I do not think that we should make decisions based on what they tell us. And I know that I was recently interviewed on this topic by a local news station, and Flock kind of led them along, and then at the last minute just canceled and refused to even answer questions that the public has about what they're doing with our data. So that is point number one. We should not trust Flock. Also, to get to Representative Duran's question, the issue isn't just the individual isolated data that might be pulled in one situation. It's that taken collectively, we are tracking people's movements as private law-abiding citizens. And with this ubiquitous data collection through automatic license plate readers, the authorities are able to determine what we are doing in our private lives. And that is really troubling. And that's why we created the ALPR reporting requirements in the first place. The people of Minnesota deserve to have insights into how this data is being used and some control over how that data is being used. And lastly, just to kind of echo Chair Mulher, I think $2,500 a year is a price that city councils and local communities would be happy to pay in light of the utility of automatic license plate readers. This bill would not interfere with that utility, in my opinion, and so I just am strongly in support. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Van Binsbergen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the BCA is going to be the gatekeeper of their information, correct? No?
Representative Tabke.
Madam Chair, Representative Van Binsberger, no, the A1, that was the original part of the bill, yes, but that has been eliminated via the M1.
Okay. So
Representative Van Binsbergen.
my question is in regards to overall cost back to the state. Where, I don't see any fiscal notes. Can you give us some indication what you see this costing the state of Minnesota?
Representative Tabke.
Chair Liebling and Representative Van Binsbergen, that there is no cost to the state on this. This is data privacy and how local jurisdictions handle that data privacy. So there's no cost to the state with regard to this bill.
Yeah, and if I could just add, Mr. Sandy informs me that there is a preliminary fiscal note. It's not been released yet, but the bill, if the bill leaves this committee, it's going back to public safety. So I assume that that's where the fiscal note would be examined.
Yes, that is the Committee of Jurisdiction over the Finance, yes.
So there's
Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there might not be a specific cost to the state, but there's still a cost, right? I mean, this is going somewhere. Someone's got to pay this bill, whether it's local.
Representative Tabke.
Thank you, Chair Liebling and Representative Van Binsbergen. So what this, as Chief Potts was talking about, there's the audit, which is already required biannually. So this is an additional audit every other year as the bill is written today. And it wouldn't need to stay that way, as I said. But no, this is making sure that we have the right, toggle switches in the software configured properly so that Minnesotans' private data is not available to anybody who wants to access it across the world. And that has no cost to the state of Minnesota. That is good data practices for how we want our private data to be handled in Minnesota.
Okay, thank you. All right, Chair Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Tabke, thank you for all the good conversations we've had over this. And I think there's some common ground here. And I think you have reducing the number of days that non-investigative data can be kept. I think 48 hours is too short, but I think we can maybe be, that we could probably lessen that 60-day. That was something that when this law was passed that gave me some heartburn. And I think also, I've also had conversations, not just with you, but with law enforcement and with other data folks that are concerned about this. And I think there's agreement that the statute needs to be revisited. It's been, I think, 2015, what's that, 10, 11 years since this became law. So I think there are some things that need to be tweaked. I had a bill drafted. I just got the jackets. So I think there are some things that we can do, and you have my commitment to work on this over the interim. I think the issues that you're raising are important. I'm just not sure that this is the best way to do it and address those issues. I also have concerns about sweeping in the private companies in the bill as well, and I know you're just really kind of asking them for signage and to commit to not sharing the information. I'm not sure that's a good precedent to start. But all of that said, I just want to say thank you for bringing the bill. Thank you for all the conversations we've had, and I really do want to work on this going forward, and I commit to doing that, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. And final word, Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Chair Liebling, for hearing this bill. I think that as more Minnesotans learn about what is going on with regard to their data attached to their license plate, that they will be enraged as to what is happening with their own private data. What is happening across the state and across the country is it's just simply not right. And we want to, what this bill will do is help rein that in. I understand it's not perfect. And thank you very much, Chair Scott, for all of your conversations on things. Just a note, the 48-hour limit on that is based on what currently is in law for the troopers today. So that's where that came from. It wasn't just a number that was plucked. It's in current use in the state of Minnesota. And so that's where that came from. But again, happy to change that. And again, this is a huge, huge issue that people of Minnesota need help on. And so I beg folks to let this move forward to public safety so that we can continue to work on it and incorporate issues that as they come up and make sure that Minnesotans know what is happening with their data and have access, their private data not being accessed by anyone who wants to see it across the country.
All right, thank you, Representative Tapke. And just before we vote, and before I renew the motion, I guess I would just say I heard several members mention they want to work with the author. I think Chair Scott was clear, she means over the interim. But, this bill is going to public safety. If people want to work with the author to get something done this year, the way to do that is not to get a roll call and vote no on the bill here in committee. Because and I've said this before, when we vote on a bill in committee, you are voting to re-refer it. You are not saying this is a perfect bill, I support it in its current form, and I want it to pass in its current form. You are saying I'm moving it to the next committee. This bill would go to public safety. If we don't have enough votes to move it to public safety, the bill is essentially dead for the session. I don't know, I suppose it's always possible for coming from the Senate or something, but for all intents and purposes, the bill is dead and there's no opportunity to work on it for the rest of the session. So just so people are clear on that, so with that, I'm going to renew my motion that House File 4205 as amended be re-referred to the Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee. Clerk will take the roll.
Chair Liebling.
Aye.
Liebling, aye. Chair Scott. Scott, no. Vice Chair Finke.
Aye.
Finke, aye. Vice Chair Hudson. Hudson, no. Representative Bliss.
No.
Bliss, no. Representative Curran.
Aye.
Curran, aye. Representative Duran.
No.
Duran, no. Representative Engen.
No.
Engen, no. Representative Feist.
Aye.
Feist, aye. Representative Frazier.
Aye.
Frazier, aye. Representative Mahmoud.
Aye.
Mahmoud, aye. Representative Moeller.
Aye.
Moeller, aye. Representative Steer.
No.
Steer, no. Representative Van Binsbergen.
No.
Van Binsbergen, no. 7-7.
So there being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the motion does not prevail and the bill does not advance. Thank you.
Thank you, chairs.